Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Dorsey. I'm the Community 412 coordinator at the Naperville Yellow Box of Community Christian Church. I just want to thank you for joining in for this event this evening. This is a very different Justice Series event that we have typically done in the past. For those of you who have never joined us in a Justice Series event, all of them are virtual right now. We still have people jumping in here, so I'll keep letting people in as I talk. Our Justice Series events are events that we put together to have conversations around historical or restorative justice initiatives from mostly a historical perspective, but we try to use stories from people's lives to tell an injustice that's taken place and then kind of reflect the heart of God around these particular issues. As most of you guys know, the climate that we're in today is very unique, probably at the point in time when we've never seen anything quite like this when it comes to conversations around race and racism, reconciliation, love and unity, however you want to kind of look at it. And so what I decided to do was do something very different today. We're going to have a conversation with a few friends of mine, a few brothers that I've gotten to know over the past few years, and we're just going to talk. Oftentimes, just kind of in the cultural context of the Black community, a lot of barbershop conversations take place around anything from sports to social issues to family issues to manhood issues. And it's very typical for Black men to discuss things from our perspective in the context of a barbershop. So today, that's what we're going to be doing. We're just going to be having a conversation amongst ourselves that you get an opportunity to be a fly on the wall to how Black men think, how our lens has been shaped in being living in America, some of our experiences, our hurts, our pains, our struggles, stories that have been passed on for us from previous generations. And I think it will go a long way to kind of help people understand, people of different cultures and ethnicities understand some of what's going on in the news today. As you guys know, there's a lot of conversation. If you're on social media, it's very noisy, a lot of different perspectives, and very, very few people are taking the posture of listening to hear exactly what some of these issues are. So the perspective that we'll be sharing from is we're not saying that this is the right or the only perspective, but it is an important perspective when we're trying to assess what it means to love your neighbor, to walk in solidarity with one another, from different cultural backgrounds, different ethnicities. Listening is an important posture that we have to take to walk in love. So as we do this, that's the intent of this conversation. At the end, we're going to be opening up for some questions. So for right now, I just kind of want you guys to sit back and listen, and then kind of write down any questions you may have and save them for the end, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. But I want to introduce our guests for tonight. We have Jon Ross with us, John is actually one of our attenders from our Downers Grove location. And we have Johnny Holmes. Johnny is a good friend and brother of mine. We have a phone call that I participate in on Saturday mornings, and most of the men that are on that call are people of color, brothers of color, and we just talk about issues that affect us and try to encourage each other and support each other just in life as Christian men. And Johnny's a great source of wisdom for me. Johnny's very different than me. Actually, we brought him on because he contrasts my personality and some of the other guys' personality on the call. So I think he'll give some really good perspective as well. And Alex Willis, Alex, you on, man? You finished eating? Alex was rushing. He was eating dinner, trying to jump on real quick.
Tough, man.
Alex is kind of a new.
Finished.
You finished? Okay. Alex is a new attender of community at the Yellow Box. He's from Florida, and he's a former professional football player. He also has professionally, he does a lot in coaching and leadership development. We'll let him kind of share a little bit about that. But real quick, I want to just kind of we'll start with Jon Ross. I want you to just introduce yourself. Jon, give us a little bit about your background coming up, where you were raised, kind of the context of how you were raised, just so we can all kind of get a feel of who you are, where you come from.
Yeah, first, I'm just excited to be here, to be able to have this conversation. But for those that don't know who I am, my name is Jon Ross, and I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. So I come from family members that were born and raised in Chicago, and then on the other side of the family were born and raised in Shaw, Mississippi. And so you had a different upbringing based upon which neighborhood that the family came from, right? And so on my mom's side, who was pretty much raised on the south side of Chicago, you got the stories of how it was growing up in Chicago and how segregated it was and which neighborhoods to watch out for and what things to kind of get involved in to kind of keep you out of trouble. As well as a lot of the people that they hung around were part of the civil rights movement. So you had a lot of education of what was going on when it came to race relations in America, as well as those leaders that came out of the civil rights leader and just personal stories of that. And then on my grandparents' side of the family, it was the family that experienced Jim Crow, right? And I guess we'll talk more about what Jim Crow is later for those that don't know about it, but they came from that experience. And so hearing how they never wanted me to go back to the South, how, I should never, ever, get involved in relationships with whites from the South because this could happen to you, that could happen to you. So it was a relationship that they had with the South was just not a good thing. And so all those things influenced my early upbringing. And so that's pretty much the gist of who I am and where my family comes from and kind of the understanding that I have when it comes to, growing up in family with two totally different upbringings.
Well, Johnny Holmes, why don't you jump in, kind of give us a little similar background for you?
All right, grace and peace, everyone. I'm from Robbins, Illinois. It's a south suburb of Chicago. If you are familiar with Dwayne Wade, the Miami Heat champion, he did a commercial years ago where he walked up the bleachers and got in the big box and turned on the intercom and said, "Number 3 from Robbins, Illinois," right? And then the commercial goes off. That was Wade's way of honoring and respecting the community from which we're from. Grew up right around the corner. Well, he grew up right around the corner from me. He's considerably younger than I am. Played ball with my little brothers. I played with his dad. So, we're good friends and family. But we're from that small town in the south suburbs. My dad was chief of police for over 20 years in Robbins, Illinois. He was also head of security at Dwight D. Eisenhower High School in Blue Island, Illinois, where I also attended and graduated from high school in '87. My background, my dad was born in Montgomery, Alabama. Came this way, I think, around the age of 3 to 6 years old. I'm not really sure about that. My mom was born here. Her family was from Tennessee. Her grandmother was from Tennessee. And the story behind it, and it's a real quiet story, like a lot of our stories. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of the detail of what actually happened, what brought you here. Big Mom, we called her. But what I was told by some cousins as some of the story was pieced down, I think while she was a young teenage girl, she was working in the home of some family, white family, and the gentleman of the home, I guess, decided he was going to make an advance at her that night. And as a young lady, she decided she wasn't going to subject herself to it. So she packed up and came north and was fortunate to relocate here. And so my mom's side kind of spawned from there. My dad, he's far more of the militaristic guy. He spent some time in the military. He is a vet. Did a couple of years right before, I think right after Nam. And, but his experience, my experience out in Robbins, is a primarily all Black community. So our experiences in the neighborhood were quite different than those outside of the neighborhood. We didn't travel, we had to go outside of the neighborhood pretty much for everything of substance. I went to school outside of the neighborhood. It was my folks' dream to socialize me with other groups of individuals so that I would be a little bit more grounded and not so isolated and just thinking in terms of how we thought in our space. But when I went to a school in Midlothian, grade school called Springfield Elementary, And then I transitioned from Springfield to a school called Colmar, where I did my junior high. And I'll tell you a brief story about junior high, and I'll be done there, Eric. In junior high, my 8th grade year, we were told, probably like most 8th grade students, that if you got gotten in any trouble or was caught fighting, you probably would lose some of your privileges. As you know, for graduation, you may not be able to walk the stage and that kind of thing. Well, I had gotten into I'm gonna call it just an argument, a disagreement of sort. It was nothing physical, with a young lady in my class, and she had a boyfriend that was across town. I didn't know that she, at some point, notified him that she had words with me. And so that end of that day, this white guy, and I mean, it was like a mob of white men outside of my classroom, and they're pointing in the window. I mean, no police showed up. I was petrified. I thought I was going to be lynched, to be sure. And when I got outside of the class, it was fortunate. I saw a mob of Black guys. I don't know where they came from. They wasn't from my neighborhood, but I found out that there's another town right next door, Crestwood, Illinois, and these guys somehow got word that there was going to be a race war, a race riot. So those that were interested in that came on up. And so I was fortunate that they were there just to kind of have my back. And it was like a Warriors, like a scene from the Warriors, bro. We walked over to a big open field. First of all, I had to walk home. There was no busing. So I had to walk through this town, and it was a nice little walk home. There was no way I was going to get home without fighting this guy. So we walked over to this open field, and they kind of made the big circle, and they stayed on one side and our group stood on the other. And we were in the center and we fought. When the fight was over, the officers, Midlothian police, came and picked us up. They handcuffed us together, put us in the back seat. When we got in the back seat, the guy's name was Chris. Chris says to me, "Hey man, I'm sorry about that. I was just trying to defend my girl's honor." I said to him, "Man, shut up talking to me. You just made me probably ruin all my graduation, privileges." My retort to this guy caused the officer to tell me, "Nigger, you all should stay in your own neighborhood and go to school in your own neighborhood, right? Mm-hmm. Shut your mouth, nigger." And so I shut my mouth. My dad was a lieutenant, though, in Robbins at the time. He wasn't chief. So I knew I had an opportunity once I got to the station to make a call. I made my call. And when I asked for Officer Holmes, his eyes got big. And needless to say, my dad came down there, and after they didn't rough me up or nothing like that. They took me in the back, took a few photos, and acted like they were doing the fingerprint thing. But I mean, 12 years old, I was traumatized. And but my dad came up there. They bought Chris some chips. He got a chance to sit in the police office and eat chips and wait on his mom to get there. So that was the dichotomy of my situation coming up. And I'll leave you there. We'll talk about high school and maybe some more later.
Wow, good story. Well, Alex, why don't you jump on in, man? Give us a little background on.
Well, I'll jump in and be real quick with it. My name's Alex Willis. I'm probably the only one on the call from these other three gentlemen who grew up in the South. So I grew up in the South, lived my entire life in the South, in Florida, in Jacksonville, Florida. And so I just recently moved up to the North last year. But all of 40 years of my life, I've been in the South. And so I grew up, you guys have the South side of Chicago here. We have the North side of Jacksonville in Florida, which is equivalent to the South side. And so the North side is kind of the stain of Jacksonville, you would say, just a rougher part of town. And growing up, I went to a school, unlike Jon, I went to school in my neighborhood, which was an all-Black high school. We had probably about 3,000 students, and I know for a fact we had 2 white kids in the entire school. And so I grew up in an all-Black neighborhood, all-Black high school, and went to an all-Black church. And that was the extent of my upbringing until about 17 or 18. And I just so happened to be a pretty decent athlete, halfway decent athlete. And so I went to the University of Florida, which was a total surprise for me because when I got there, there were 40,000 white students and we were the minority. So I went from being the majority in high school to having about 600 total Black students on campus of a total of 40,000. And that was a real shocker for me. So it was a real shocker and how I was acclimated to just a different culture. From there, as Eric said, I went on to play professional sports. And so that was definitely something different for me. And so I've always been, I came from the hood, right? So from the toughest part of Jacksonville, lived two doors down from the drug dealer's house. But sports gave me sort of, if you want to call it privilege, it gave me an advantage. It gave me an advantage that a lot of my Black male friends didn't have because, you know, I hate to say it, but because they couldn't run fast, right? And so because they couldn't run fast like Alex could, Alex had a lot of different situations from education to run-ins in different areas. But because I was at the University of Florida playing for the Gators, I would get special treatment, you know, and I didn't see it at the time until later and understand that it is my responsibility to go back and look out for gentlemen who are not like me, who don't have necessarily the privilege that I had as a result of that. And so as Eric said, went on to play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, played for Coach Tony Dungy, and a phenomenal gentleman there to just learn more about myself, what it means to be an African-American in the NFL and the challenges of that. Coach Dungy really brought a lot of that out as I played for him and taught us how to carry ourselves really, really well. And from there, as Eric said, I went on, you know, skip fast forward the story, to start a company in leadership development, specifically in the area of construction. And here again, I found myself as a minority. Predominantly, I'm in the electrical industry where I do leadership development for countries all over companies all over the country. But oftentimes at the national convention, I'm the national speaker, 6,000 companies, and I'm usually the only African-American in the room. And so there again is special treatment a lot of times there. And I have to really share the story of a lot of African-American men who may not have the same privilege that I have, but I'm cut from the same cloth. And I have to let people know that and also speak and say, hey, how privileged I am to do that. So I'm excited to talk today about that, being both from the north side of Jacksonville in the hood to being with Fortune 500 CEOs where, you know, currently right now with the climate, they're calling me, Eric, you know, just truth be told, because I'm probably one of their closest or only Black friends.
Yeah. So you're the Black friend.
And say, Alex, we need some help, man. What should we be doing in this situation? So, you know, I have to, you know, call and talk, and we're having just great, candid conversations in a loving way, right? But at the same time, being open and honest to have that conversation. Because similar to me growing up in north side of Jacksonville, I didn't have a lot of white friends. So I did not know what white America was like because all I knew was Black America, right? Yeah. And similar to a lot of my CEO buddies now who have been privileged to run multi-million-dollar companies, they're clueless about, you know, Black America and Black life and Black men and what that's like. So it gives us a great opportunity to bring that together and talk about it, to be able to see it and understand each other, respect each other, but at the same time, deliver truth and be honest. So that's a little bit about me, Eric.
That's good. Well, you brought up something I want to and I'm going to come back to you, Alex, and then we'll kind of go back to the other two Johns. But you brought up you're the Black friend. We talk about that a lot, you know, as in the Black community, about being the one Black friend or the one Black voice in an all white spaces. What is that like for you? Like, what type of adjustments do you have to make culturally and how you act and how you talk to be in those spaces, to be accepted in those spaces? What would you say to that?
It's challenging, Eric. I'll be honest. You know, since we talk barbershop, you know, you go by nicknames in the barbershop. You know,
just us in the room talking. Yeah.
You know, he is challenging, man. You know, probably in the last, my wife is on here, and she can justify tell the truth on all of this. Probably in the last 5 to 10 years, I've really had a mind shift right? And that's how it is in Black community. And so since we're being honest, let's keep it real and be honest here. As a Black male, oftentimes when you make it out of the inner city, you got two choices. A lot of Black people are like, man, I ain't never going back. I ain't never going back. I made it out of that. I'm alive. I'm middle to upper class now. See you, y'all. Good luck, right? And so you run for the hills. And you just say, you know what, I only care about myself. I only care about my family, and I'm going to do all I can like that. And so for a long time in my life, I was like that, right? I was like that. Hey, man, hey, not affecting me, right? Not affecting me. And I took that mindset. And it wasn't until several years ago that I really began to say, wait a minute, dude, the Lord has put you in a position, man, that you're privileged. You have the ear of a lot of people. Right? A lot of people trust you. They want to be around you. They want to hear football stories. They want to hear Dungeon. They want to hear Spurrier. Use that to really educate them on, when I say them, I'm talking white America predominantly, on Black life, Black issues, and real things like that. And so since taking that stance, it really has caused me to be strategic, Eric, because what I've learned is you can catch a lot of flies with honey versus vinegar. Right. And a lot of times it's not me being an angry Black man that will get attention. Right. Like that. It's me really being an open source for them to be able to talk. And it's very hurtful at times. I'll be honest, because to do that, you have to put yourself out there, and people are sharing a lot of information. As Jon said, one of my largest clients right now, a huge mechanical company. And I'm sitting in the meeting. And the gentleman, he owns the company, and he's just talking to me, Eric, and he's like, hey, you know what? I'm so glad to see you. I watched you play. He's a huge donor at my alma mater. And he said, when I grew up, because he's about 80 years old. When I grew up, the niggers played at FAMU, and that was just his response. And everyone else in the room cringed, and they're like, oh my God, did he just say that? And because I'm trying to do bigger and better things, because I'm trying to open the doors for other minorities, I said, well, no, sir, we don't do that anymore. I didn't go along with it and get angry or mad, because I'm understanding the position that God has placed me in is to, really subtly but show love, right, and open doors for minorities. But it means a lot of times, Eric, I have to be alone. I have to be alone in how I see life and how I understand life. And it's a marathon for me, not to necessarily beat people over the head to get them to understand it, but to have a loving, open environment where people can begin to share their life with me, and me not judge them, me not beat them up and judge them, but then at the same time say, hey, listen, I want you to see this other side here and do that. And through that, we've had tremendous success, Eric. I mean, that's the reason I moved to Chicago, because the city of Chicago wanted to talk about how do we bring more minorities into the electrical field. They're like, hey, let's bring Alex up and let's let him be a part of that. The CEO of NECA, which is the National Electrical Contractors Association, is my mentor. And we talk now on how do we bring more minority businesses, and how do we create a fund to fund them, to give them this money, right? And so therefore, it's me having to take a step back sometime, bite my words at times and say, you know what, hey, that's a conversation to tackle another day. Yeah. Right. Tuck that away, Alex, and we'll come back when we build a better relationship here with this owner or with this president, and to do that. So it is walking gingerly, as I think a lot of us on this call will talk and share with everyone here. There's two sides, and so you have to understand how to get down in the hood, Jon Holmes, and talk hood language. And at the same time, when you get in white America, you can't say, well, what it is, what it be, where we getting it down, right? And so you have to understand how to do that balance. Whereas a lot of times, white America can be the same everywhere they go. Yeah. We can't necessarily be the same everywhere we go. When I get in with the $100 million, $600 million CEO, I can't say what it is, homeboy, right? He looking at me real crazy, kicking me out the door. Whereas if I talk the way I talk to him in the hood, they coming to beat me up. Jon, they gonna send me out of here. They say, man, let's beat this dude up and send him out. So you have to have that balance.
Yeah, that's good. And I think, being able to tolerate comments like that and handle them in a professional manner is necessary in order to maintain a level of success in corporate America or in certain educational settings, and sometimes in certain church settings as well. So I want Johnny Holmes, I want you to go next. Just kind of talk about what type of mental adjustments you have to make it, being in all white spaces, being the only Black person in the room. How is that? How do you approach that?
So it's been a balancing act most of my life, I could say, having gone through the schooling that I went through. You know, I can be honest with you, we were chased home quite frequently throughout my first 8 years. We were never caught, so I don't know if it was just to terrorize or to intimidate, but you know, it was always an idea of fear created around the school, in the neighborhood. You know, they had a arcade right up the street from my school, and a lot of the kids, when they got out of school, would go to the arcade. I used to ask my mom, I got quarters, can I go to the arcade? No, you cannot go to the arcade because you're not wanted over there. And so that was a very difficult thing to digest early on. I was an athlete, probably one of the most talented in my class. We had a bunch of talented guys on my block. My block, Maxi Court, which is right outside of the school. We were really real close to the school. Had a bunch of state champions, that type of thing. But when, like I said, when you left the neighborhood and had to try to assimilate, I found myself having a lot of challenges in that way. I think my parents, I had the perfect balance. I had a dad who was, I said militant, but he was very diplomatic. You know, his wisdom was, it still blows my mind how he handles situations. But my mom, she came up in church, kept us in church. So, you know, I got filled with a lot of word and a lot of nonviolent teaching, turn the other cheek type teaching. So it kind of contradicted a lot of how I internally felt. But I realized kind of early on, and especially by 8th grade, when I ran into my first encounter with an officer in any fashion, was with this officer when the kid came to fight me. And to be addressed the way he addressed me, it made it, and his statement, you know, you niggas need to stay in your own neighborhood. It made it clear to me that okay, there are places that they just don't want you, right? And I'm good with not wanting to be places where people don't want me. To be frank, I don't really want to be nowhere no one wants me to be. I don't really want you around me if you don't want me around you, kind of thing. So I think I had maybe some challenges when it came to the juxtaposition of the wisdom of God's word, as my mother was articulated, and what the social reality was for me on the ground, and trying to navigate that. I was born in '69. You know, on the tail end of all the riots that were, you know, the nation that was in an upswell because of the Dr. King assassination. COINTELPRO, as you mentioned, man, that was a powerful bit too, bro. I did not know that when you first said, you know, he didn't know that he was being sucked into that narrative. I was like, come on, bro. But as you illustrated it, it made perfect sense. So I think like him even, you know, I empathize with most of us, because I think, you know, and I mean on both sides. Let me be perfectly clear. I've gotten to a place in my development where I truly empathize with my white brothers and sisters, because you really got to be messed up to feel like you feel, and to think that you're better because of the color of your skin or because of any of that. There's really got to be some. My daddy used to say all the time, "Oh, they just got brain damage," and he wasn't referring to white folks. He was referring that was oftentimes to us.
Right.
You know, he was being critical of folks in the neighborhood, and his critique was often if he saw someone behaving, you know, in a way that was not respectful, or they just got brain damage. And so I just started to probably process, oh, that's these white folks' problem. They just got brain damage.
Yeah.
So that's probably the best way that I've been able to deal with it, my brother. And you know, again, I don't try to blur the lines. You know, once you make it clear that you want to be over there and I'm over here, that's cool. But don't come over here, because we gonna talk about that nonviolence in a minute.
Yeah, I hear you. We're gonna come back to that too, the nonviolent piece. We'll come back. Jon Ross, how you navigate that challenge of being the black face in the white room?
Well, it was very challenging starting out, right? Because the neighborhood that I grew up in was predominantly black. And so up until about my 18th birthday and going to college, my interactions with, white people were mainly, school teachers or police officers, right? So it was always an authority figure that was interacting with. And so I didn't understand really how to navigate it at first. Now, my grandfather, who always kind of, because he was a Hall of Fame softball player, he just knew how to interact with, different races. And so I would watch him, how, he would talk one way around the family and around the neighborhood. And then if the phone, rings and it was somebody, that was white or was in a circle where there was white people, his vernacular would totally change, right?
Put his voice on. Put his voice on.
Yeah, he put his voice on, right? And so, I kind of picked up on it, but I just didn't understand it until I became a grown man and started to realize that there were certain places that when I would go and try to be myself, it just wasn't accepted, mainly at Columbia College. I went to school downtown Chicago. So when I was around a lot of my white friends, or even like the white professors, the first 2 years were very rough for me because I was still this kid from the hood, and I didn't know how to turn it on and turn it off. But it was when I started working on movies that I started to really learn the game. And a lot of people kind of took me under their wing and taught me some stuff. And so I was fortunate to be able to, work with, Will Smith, be able to talk to Muhammad Ali, be able to talk to Ice Cube and all these other guys that were navigating this Hollywood scene and knew how to turn it on and turn it off, and how do you relate to people. Because one of the things that I didn't understand was, how do you network or anything like that. And so when it came time for me to, move into a predominantly white neighborhood, it was challenging because a lot of the styles that I like to wear, or a lot of the conversations that I like to have, it's often looked at as, like, I call it the costume of a criminal, right? So if you're a black man with a hoodie on, even though I'm just going to just relax, I'm looked at as a threat.
Look at Alex, yeah.
Right, you know what I'm saying? I'm looked at as a threat. And so a lot of times I would just be driving in Wheaton, Illinois, and I'll get stopped for no reason, right? And so it was very, very difficult about that. And then the next thing that was very difficult is that a lot of times when I was, trying to accolade myself to those communities, there was no interest in where I came from. There was no interest in my music, no interest in, things that I enjoyed. So everything that I did, all the music that I listened to try to connect to my white brothers and sisters, it was always on their terms. So it was always their music, their favorite, TV show, their favorite movies, all those things. And so it was very, very difficult for me. And even still to this day, it's still very difficult to turn it on and turn it off. And so my family and I, we just recently moved back to the city of Chicago. And I'm gonna be honest with you, even though we live in a predominantly white neighborhood in the city of Chicago as well, but we're close to things that, matter to us as well, right? So the foods that we like, the music that we like, those things, a lot of the anxiety that I had by living in an all-white community that I feel like never really accepted me, right?
Yeah.
They accepted the version of me, which was the professional who won awards for movies and things of that nature. That side was accepted a lot, but not the real Jon, right? The Jon that at 14 years old was stopped by police officers and snatched out the car and thrown under the hood, right? At 14, because they thought that I was doing something. I was on honor roll, right? And that was never there. So nobody really wanted to hear or be a part of that really that much and experience the music or the culture from growing up on the south side of Chicago, or the food from growing up on the south side of Chicago. And so I never, ever, even though it was a great neighborhood to live in, the kids were safe, the family was safe, but I just never seemed like I ever fit in. And that's the most challenging thing. Never feeling like you ever fit in.
Yeah, and it's exhausting because it's a mask that you have to wear all the time, and the energy that it takes to put that on and take it off is very difficult. Yeah. Alex, you want to jump in?
Eric, I want to jump in on that and stay where Jon is. That is definitely the challenge, with it, because it does take, like you were saying, Eric, a lot of energy, because oftentimes being a black male or just a black family, white America invites you in, but like Jon said, I want to highlight what he said, but it's on their terms, right? So even from a church perspective, I've had a lot of pastors, because when they find out I do leadership development, they're like, hey, Alex, we want to be multicultural. How do we do it, man? What do we do? And I tell them quite frequently, I say, listen, you're bringing a lot of minorities, be it black, Hispanic, Indian, in, but you're bringing them in on your terms. You're still saying, now, come on, you have to get this guitar when we do worship, and this is how we're going to do worship, right? It's not saying, well, hey, guys, What do you like? Do you like choirs? Every now and again, we may bring in a choir. Hey, listen, we know that minorities like this, so we're going to change our services up a little bit so that we do this. And what I like to tell people, Eric and John, that's checking the box for diversity, because a lot of white America check the box for diversity, but not inclusion, right? We just want the numbers, but we're not going to include you. We're not going to include your thoughts. We're not going to include your ideas, your music, what you like, but we're saying we're diverse. And so I tell people all the time, diversity without inclusion is like having the Energizer Bunny without batteries. What good is that? It ain't no good, right? It's just standing there, sitting there. Yeah. And a lot of times we invite Black America or minorities in, but there's no voice, there's no concern, like John said, and ultimately we're checking the box. Good for the picture. You know, you take the picture, we got everybody on the photo, but right. As far as having a voice, or as far as saying, hey, what's your concerns here? What do you think will work best? There's never any of that brought to the table.
Very good. Well said. Well said. You know, and what was the interesting perspective that I have about what you were saying, Jon Ross, about how you felt when you moved back to the city. I was raised in an all-Black community in Maywood, Illinois, on the west side of Chicago for the first 14 years of my life. And then my parents moved from Maywood to Addison, Illinois, which in the mid 80s was predominantly white, like 98.9% white. So it was a big cultural shock for me. But one thing that I recognize is that I had a couple of encounters with police officers when I was in the Black neighborhood, and it was very different than when I lived in the white neighborhood. And not just with police officers, but just in general, the feeling of going back to where you belong. It's one thing when you live in a Black neighborhood, you get caught outside of that neighborhood and you say, okay, I'm not wanted here. But it's a different feeling when you actually live in the neighborhood that they don't want you in. That's a really weird dynamic. And I remember the first time I had an experience living in Addison, I was in 8th grade. And I was walking down, for those of you who may live there or from there, Army Trail Road on the corner of Lake Street and Army Trail next to the junior high school. And as I'm walking there towards this jewel, there was an IROC Z28, Camaro Z28, black, drive up right along the road and scream out, "Get the F out of here, you nigger," you know, really loud. Rock music blaring, sped off. And I remember feeling paralyzed, like, oh my God, like how many other people think that way? Mm-hmm. Am I really wanted here? You know, people are, how can I tell who's my friend and who's not? Because in my mind, I had been conditioned by living in a Black neighborhood that most white people don't like me because of my skin color. So to go into that environment and have that experience, it magnified those fears that were already there, and it made me paranoid about who I could trust and who I couldn't. And so fortunately, over the next few months and years, I was able to meet other people, very great white people that I'm friends with to this day, that kind of helped break down those barriers. But it's still, I never could fully allow myself to be comfortable in that setting because I never knew when the next experience was going to happen that made me keep those guards up. So, you know, I think that white America does not understand that tension of that struggle to be a person of color in an all-white community or an all-white culture or an all-white corporation where you have to be on guard at all time. Because even like the story that you told, Alex, if you weren't on guard, even subconsciously, when the old man said what he said, you might have went off in that moment. Right. But you always have to have that subconscious guard up to be ready for those types of things where you can react in a way that won't get you pushed out of those circles. Right. And that's a challenge.
Eric, that's the real challenge. And just, I wrote a note down really quickly because each of us, and I would love to hear you brothers' thoughts on this, because there's a different challenge that we all face on this call for the people who are watching, and that is being a middle to upper class Black man. Because as John said, it's almost damn if you do, damn if you don't. I hate to say it like that, but just being honest there, because if you move into a white neighborhood a lot of times you're looked at crazy and you're looked at, you know, and it's very challenging for your kids. You have to really be cognizant of your kids, what's going on, what they're saying, what people are saying around them. But then if you move back into the black neighborhood, you're going to get robbed because you'd have made it. I'm just being honest with you, because sometimes because you made it. So, and that's not everybody in the black neighborhood, but there are a lot of people. And here's the crazy part. And my friends think I'm so crazy about this. If I go back to the black neighborhood and I get robbed, guys, I'm not even upset because I understand they're trying to make it. And that is crazy as that may seem. And people can't understand that. I'm like, guys, until you know what it's like not to have food, until you know what it's like not to have parents that raised you at all, yeah, you're going to get upset if somebody pull a gun on you and rob you and take your stuff. But for me, I'm like, young brother, hey, man, listen, you can have this, man. Listen, I understand how tough it is. But at the same time, it's still a challenge that I have to face, right? That I have to face because if I make enough money to move to Naperville or wherever, like I am now, right? Or if I say, you know what, I'm going to take all my wealth and move back to a certain area, it's a challenge still for me being a black male, and it's still me having to think. There's never a time really that I'm gonna be at a place where I can say, oh, I don't have to think about it. We all right here, guys. Come on, family. Oh, I'm always like, you know, what's going on? Keep my head on the swivel.
Yeah, very good. Hey, I want to bring Johnny Holmes in. As you brought up something, Alex, that I want to kind of draw it a little bit more, and that's kind of the struggles of the black community. Johnny, I know you worked as a corrections officer at a youth detention facility, right? So you kind of dealt with this on a whole nother level, but also you lived in kind of the urban context as well. So there's a lot of misconceptions about the black community. You know, black people are lazy, they're violent, they're more, you know, have more tendencies to commit crimes. Let's kind of pull that apart a little bit and see where that comes from, what's real, what's not. And kind of give people insight on how we view that as black men. So you want to touch on that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So I worked at the Cook County Juvenile Center from 96 to 07, 11 years. Loved the work, loved the juveniles. When I started in 96, the bed count was, well, the beds were 450. We had a count of 800 and something. So there were almost 30 young kids to each unit, where you only had like maybe 18 rooms. So it was nothing to have another 12 to 15 inmates or residents, we called them, sleeping on cots on the section. So, and that's all night. They would be transported from other units and they would make a certain unit sleeper units. But the population of kids, let me be frank, I don't believe I've run into a more talented bunch of youth than in the juvenile center. The population when I started, 86, 84%, I think, was African-American. They only had 2 female units at the time. But over those 11 years, the females population increased. And the intent of the various organizations, John Howard Association, Annie E. Casey Foundation, a lot of these organizations set out to reduce the facility's population. I believe a lot of these organizations believe, based on records of other institutions throughout the nation, that these types of facilities were detrimental to the development of children. I disagree strongly. I do believe that these types of facilities can be traumatic in ways. There are traumatic events that happen within those facilities for sure, but the type of constructive support, social, emotional support that was given to those youth was amazing. We had group sessions all the time. They had a lot of chaplain sessions and a lot of outside organizations, and quite frankly, a lot of white missionaries came in there. And I hope I'm not already in my brief time here. I have a tendency, I think, to be selected for these types of conversations because I have a tendency to speak how I feel based on my experience, and it harmonizes a lot with the rage that maybe many express on the street and maybe not so articulately, okay? Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's why I'm oftentimes selected. But I do feel them. I feel their rage. I feel their anger. and to be locked up in a facility, many of them, let's be clear, a lot of the young men that were in there for nonviolent drug offenses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so blacks, unfortunately, I ran into Michelle Alexander, the writer of The New Jim Crow. I encourage anyone to pick that book. That's a great book if you're interested in seeing some historical context. She, I believe, was from Ohio State University, was an attorney. And what I found to be interesting was she was doing a book signing. And in her initial opening, she expressed how a young guy, I think she talks about this in the introduction of the book, but how a young guy came to her and was telling her how he was being, afraid for his life. And I guess there was a police officer in this particular area that was constantly at him. And so he ran to her hoping that she could be some type of advocate for him. But she, like many people, dismissed him and felt as if, oh, he's just, you know, probably just talking, he's a knucklehead, whatever. And he ended up dead at the hands of this same officer. And I believe that was the thing that really broke her and made her start to give a more serious and intentional look at what young men and young women are facing through the criminal, and we say it in the hood, just us system. Because that's what it feels like. It's just us that gets picked up. We know for a fact through the data and the research that black people don't do more drugs than white people, right? We know for a fact that black people don't do more crime than white people. For example, black on black crime. Who comes up with that, right? I've never heard white on white crime. Right. Why is that a narrative? Because I think it supports the ideology that unfortunately was at the seat of a lot of the systematic racial applications throughout this, you know, throughout our tenure here on this soil. So, but the gifts, the talents of these young folks, they were innumerable. I was totally blown away by them. And then the co-workers. I have met some amazing white folks working with these kids. Amazing. I've met some not so amazing black folks working with these kids. I don't use profanity when I address children. I mean, you know, Malcolm X said a long time ago that the only reason a man uses profanity is because his vocabulary isn't expansive enough. Okay, so I kind of started to improve my vocabulary years ago and just chose, well, I think I'm gonna, you know, cease on using some of that verbiage. But when I work with the juveniles, I remember one particular day addressing a young man in a situation, and it was completely under control, but a black coworker, he was a veteran staff, I was fairly new. I had worked in a group home before, so I was familiar with the work, but he didn't like my approach. He said, brother, you got to cuss at them kids. That's the only thing they understand. I said, no, brother, I'd rather cuss at you. And so I said that only because I think that I used to call the Cook County Juvenile Center a breeding ground for criminality. I saw, and I'll leave you with this illustration because it was one that I used to use often when we were addressing these issues about that center in particular. Think about the coronavirus. Prior to the coronavirus, I didn't know what a global pandemic was like. I only speculated what would happen if I went to school and I had a contagious, you know, airborne disease, you know, a pneumonic disease. And let's say once it was discovered I had it, there was no quarantine. And I go back home. Well, not only have I put those at risk at school with contamination, but when I go back to the neighborhood, I put those at risk for contamination. Well, that's what I was witnessing for 11 years. The superintendent at the time I started, Jesse Doyle in 96, he had a term called, he had a statement, I want to stop the rate of recidivism, which simply means I want to stop the spinning door. I don't want them to leave and come back and leave and come back. And they were leaving and coming back. And what I noticed, though, when they left, they were leaving worse than when they came. So what I tried to do was take it upon myself, mini staff. We took it upon ourselves to try to make as many deposits as we could while we had them under our care, because we knew at some point they were going to have to go back home and face those same streets. Unfortunately, a lot of us couldn't pack, our parents were in a socioeconomic situation where they could relocate us to a town where we weren't wanted.
Right.
So I'm sorry, E, I feel you, bro. I don't know what that is like to be situated in a neighborhood where you gotta hear that and know that you're at home.
Yeah.
Like, cause you're right. I heard that and I could go home and I could get with my brothers and we could talk all about what we were gonna do. 9 times out of 10 didn't do nothing.
Right.
we were able to talk amongst ourselves and to deal with the trauma of that experience. So I found that a lot of those young folks, a lot of that trauma that I think was supposed they were encountering, I don't think they were being traumatized as much as these organizations thought they were. And I think the hasty way in which they started sending kids back home, not considering the condition of the home and the community, I think that left a lot of things to be desired.
That's good. Well, let's kind of bridge from there and talking about the conditions of the home. Like I want to kind of get into some historical context as well, because oftentimes what I've noticed in engaging a lot of these conversations is that so many white people, well-intended, good-hearted white people, they don't know the history that we know. And so they can't put things into context properly because there's no historical framework to be able to understand what they're seeing. So they judge it without accurate information. And so let's talk about how the Black community or urban inner city communities, how they got that way. Because if you don't understand that, you can make judgments. Well, it's obvious these people, they're just criminals. They're savages, they're whatever. But let's talk about what's some important historical references that I think that we all are common to us. We talk about a lot that may not be common knowledge. That's important to put that into context. Jon Ross, you want to?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things is that, the ideology about what people think about gangs in these communities, right? How, when they first started out, they were not started to terrorize the community. They were actually started to protect the community because they were being abused by police officers, right? So here we go again with the police conversation, right? And so you have these organizations that form to take care of the community, to feed the children within the community, to educate the communities, almost similar to what the Black Panthers did, right? But it wasn't until the influx of crack in the communities and, that started the whole drug wars, right? And what I call is the business that was introduced and okayed in a community, right? So we take all the resources out of the community, but the one thing you can't have is this drug business. Now we're going to give you a little scraps. It's not going to be enough to feed everybody in the neighborhood. Take that and do what you will with it. And that's what you kind of see the residue of that today. When that was done, there was really no game plan in it. It's just like now you have these communities that are overran by gangs, but now you have I call it the family business of the community. That is a very violent business to be in. But these gangs were not meant to terrorize the community. Yeah. And then to kind of take into context of the mindset of a lot of people of who these people are that are in the gangs. These are not monsters, right? These are not, these are not animals or anything like that. These are people that are just trying to make a living for themselves. And yes, the situation is really bad. And I don't know how many of you all have been have been living in an environment in a home where your parents went in there, where you didn't have any food and there was no resources there. So you just kind of did what you did. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you from experience that I was one of those guys, right? As a kid, my parents divorced when I was 6 years old. My mom took my sister and I to move on the west side of Chicago. But when she did that, she just kind of just took us there and just left. And so there was really nobody watching over us. There was really nobody making sure that we ate. So a lot of times just to have food in the house or to have food that night or that day, I had to go to the corner and collect bottles and tops and then take it to the corner store and get my nickels for it. And there was like a candy store right next door.
That was the hustle back in the day. I remember that.
Yeah, you know, it was the hustle, right? And so you
Yeah.
didn't think anything of it. You just thought that this is what life is. And even at the young age, I was introduced to, you know, the drug business by the drug dealers in the neighborhood. And mind you, I'm 6 and 7 years old. I have no guidance. There's no mother, no father in the home. And this is all that I pretty much knew at that time. And I remember, you know, as a kid, and I tell this story everywhere, I didn't even know that being a hooker and a pimp was a bad thing because they were the people that took care of me, right?
Wow.
So again, to go back to this thing that these people are not monsters. So at 6 and 7 years old, I fell in love. I don't know if you can even fall in love at 6 years old, but you know, I was liking this girl. Her name was Nuki, and her mother was a prostitute. And because she thought it was so cute, she started to buy me food. She started to buy me clothes, took care of me and my sister. And that's all I knew at the time was that these people loved me, right? They took me in. The pimp was like the father. He made sure that we had everything we need. And that didn't stop until my mother found out what was going on. But what I'm saying is this, is that we have to stop judging people and demonizing people. And I think that's what goes on a lot, and which causes a lot of people not to really go back to these communities and help. Like, I've always found it very interesting that, you know, a lot of people are so open to going overseas and going to third world countries and spending time in these countries, sending money over there, taking care of these people. But right down the street from your home, there are people that are hungry just like that. There are people that don't have electricity, gas. When I was 6 years old living in that community, I had to go to McDonald's just to wash up. Not to eat. I had to go to McDonald's to wash up. So imagine that a 6-year-old kid seeing all these people in there eating, and I had to walk by them with my bags and stuff to go and wash up in the bathroom, right? But that was my life at the time. And I think that a lot of it is because we don't take the time to even think about that the people in these communities are human beings. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I definitely want to make sure that people knew on this phone call, is that that killer that you may see on TV that's been arrested, that is not a monster, right?
Yeah.
A victim of the circumstance. But I can tell you, I've known a lot of killers in my lifetime. But you want to know something that was very, very cool about them as a person? These same killers will wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And if there were, you know, old elderly people in the community, they would make sure that they will have the grass cut. They would, you know, clean up the property. They would make sure that if they were carrying groceries in, they would help them carry their groceries in. These same drug dealers, if it was not for them protecting me, I probably wouldn't have been an Emmy-nominated filmmaker. But they looked at me and saw potential and said, John, you can make it out the neighborhood. They call me Hollywood. It's like, Hollywood, you can make it out the neighborhood. So I better not see you doing anything. And anytime that I ever drifted towards that way, it was some same guys. Sometimes they'd beat me up like, yo, you know, they chastise me. This is not the life you want. This is not the life you want. Yeah. And it was just one thing that they told me to do. And I told the guy's name, man. His name was Kenny Norman. He ended up getting killed about 13 years ago, which broke my heart. But Kenny, he looked me in my eye. He said, John, you don't want this business, John. And it was him that was protecting me each and every day from getting hurt, from getting caught up in the gang, because he understood the business. But the people in this community, all they're looking for is the same thing that everybody else is looking for, which is a nice home, a nice situation, food and resources. They're not lazy. They go out and work and hustle every day. Some of these drug dealers are some of the most smartest business people that you would ever meet in your life. You hear me?
Good, boy. They good, John.
You know what I'm saying? You know, but we have to start to look at people as human beings. And so let's bring a little bit of spiritual context in this, and I'm through. That when Christ speaks about loving your neighbor, right? The first you have to do is see that person as for who they really are, which is another human being, right? You know, they want the same things that you want. And yes, the situation doesn't give them that option, right? So they don't have anybody in their family that owns their own business a lot of times. They don't have anybody in their family that knows about the stock market. They don't have anybody in their family that knows about marketing. They don't have anybody in their family that has access to $600 million, right? They don't have anybody in their family that has access to even $10,000, right? So they're going based upon what they have, and they're doing the best with what they have. What they're looking for is opportunity. And the brothers you see on here, we were just fortunate to have an opportunity, you know? Yeah. But we are all human beings, and they are human beings in those communities.
That's good. Good insight, John. I want to kind of tie in something you said, actually was something that Johnny Holmes had mentioned earlier, and that was the conversation we were having before we started the call when it was just us. We were talking about the COINTELPRO. I've been really kind of digging into that. And the reason why I've been re-looking at that is because I believe that a lot of that has to do with the state of the Black community today. You can go back even further to events like the Black Wall Street situation and certain other, the Red Summer, where a lot of Black communities were destroyed during the 1920s and 1930s. But I point to COINTELPRO.
Starship Line with Marcus Garvey.
Yes, absolutely. But let me kind of, and I know we're throwing a lot out right now, but I would really encourage people that are listening to go. There's a documentary. You can find it on YouTube. It's also on Amazon Prime. It's an old documentary, and it's called The FBI's War on Black America. And so what that is COINTELPRO was an undercover FBI government kind of movement to target leaders in the Black community. And it was because there was an intentionality behind preventing the next Martin Luther King or the next Malcolm X. They considered those leaders a threat to, not necessarily to America, but just the old guard, just kind of the way things were. And there were certain people that didn't want things to change. And so those leaders were a threat to making change. So they would send, and I actually met, and I was telling these brothers here before we call, I met a guy about 7 or 8 years ago. His name was Howard Pointer, and Howard Pointer died, I think in like 2014, 2015. But I had an opportunity to talk with him for a long time. I thought what was going to be a 20-minute conversation turned to like a 2-hour conversation. And he told a story about how he was at the time working as a security guard for Jesse Jackson and Operation Push. So I asked him, I said, how did you get that job? And the story that he told me was just fascinating. He was a young man who wanted to make a difference in his community in Chicago by becoming a police officer, because he saw so many injustices around policing that he wanted to be the one to step in and make a difference. He completed the academy, and he was in a training session at the end. He got pulled out of his training session, and he met with a group of individuals and said, hey, we're pulling certain individuals out for special assignments, and we think you have potential, and long explanation as to what this was. And he agreed. He thought this was something, some honor, some privilege that he was being given. And so he began receiving these special assignments, and they were like really kind of coded, really weird assignments that he was given, like show up at this location at this time and take pictures of every person that goes in and out of this house between this time and that time. Have that film developed, put it in an envelope, and drop it off here. And that's your assignment. So that's all he would know. He had one assignment. He said he did about 7 or 8 of these. And he said one of them, it started to get suspicious as to what he was really doing. And he went to a particular location, and his assignment was to write down the license plate numbers of all the vehicles that were parked in this vicinity at this particular event. And he began noticing the people that were going in and out of this building, and he recognized several very popular Black leaders in the Black community at that time. And he said he got this pit in his stomach, like, man, what am I doing? But he finished the assignment, he dropped it off. And he said one day on the news, he was watching the news, and he saw a news report of a bomb going off at a particular house, and certain people were killed. And he said, that's when I got scared, because that's the house that I had been to a couple of months before. I had done intel on this house. I'd taken pictures at this house, and now a bomb just went off, and the people that I saw in my photos, one of them got killed. And he said he got scared. He went back to his supervisors to tell them, look, I don't want to do this anymore. Because he wouldn't say it, but he said at that time, I felt like they were using me as a spy. And so he said that the response he got was, I think you need to reconsider, because you need to think about your family. You need to think about your future. And so it was verbalized in such a way where he was being threatened, and he feared for his life. And he realized, man, I don't have a badge. He said, I don't have any proof that I'm a police officer, except for Chicago PD paycheck stub. He said, that's all I had. He said, I'd been slowly put into this lifestyle of doing these things, and I didn't even know what I was. He said he went to Jesse Jackson, had a conversation, told him everything, showed him all of the paperwork. Jesse went, had a meeting with the Chicago PD chief of police at that time, and said, hey, he showed us everything. He told us everything. He's working for me now. If anything happens to him, I'm going to make all of this public. He said they never bothered him from that point forward. But that was my first insight into what COINTELPRO was, because he was an undercover agent working, doing what do you call it? Undercover work, spying on the Black community. And so I would encourage people to watch that, because there were a lot of, there was a murder of Fred Hampton, a lot of other things that happened during the 60s and 70s that was a direct result of COINTELPRO operation that really held the Black community down. At the same time, that's when the economic redlining laws were put in place, where they wouldn't lend in Black communities. Certain loans and other opportunities were being intentionally revoked from Black communities. And so when you put that in these communities, you create a frustration and a tension that people get hopeless. And so they start turning to, I have to live, so I have to rob, I have to steal. And it's not because that's who I am by nature. I just have to survive. And I don't see any other way out. And so I think it's important to have that historical context, because a lot of our Black communities have been created from that context because of the plight. And I just gave one of, we can go on for, 12, 15, 20 different incidents in the past 50 to 60 years that have contributed to that. So I don't know if you guys want to have anything to add.
Yeah. Eric, I want to add one thing to take it even further back. When you talk about context, it's really important that we really take it all the way back. And when you just kind of think about it, because I don't think a lot of people really think about this, but even when you talk about the abolishment of slavery, you had 4 million slaves put out with nothing. And it's like, all right, what we gonna do now? Right. We don't have a place to live. We don't have anything to do. And so it's like, where do we go? What do we do? Slavery is ended. I don't have a home anymore. I'm not working for this plantation anymore. What do I do now? Right. And so when you think about that, you had nothing. You had zero at all. And it's like, we hate you because our economic system has been damaged now, because that was the only way, the major way the South made money. And so now I'm definitely not giving you a place to stay, because you don't work for me anymore. And that's when a lot of this stuff, you look at another great documentary is 13th, when you look at how now we had the 13th Amendment with loopholes to say, wait a minute, you are free unless we arrest you on a crime. And this 4 million slaves that were out there now begin to get picked up for
vagrancy.
Just vacancy.
They call it criminal mischief.
Yeah, criminal mischief. You don't have a place to stay. We're going to arrest you. And because we arrest you now you go back to the plantation and you have to give us free labor, because now we can rebuild the economy and some things up there. And so when you look at all of that, and even when you think about Black history and making it out of that to getting to a place like Black Wall Street or Tulsa, where you now have these communities that are thriving, to be bombed now, right? To be bombed and burned down to the ground. And it is very challenging, because as Black life, you see this quite frequently, where you are trying to get up there and you make it to the top, and then somebody just comes just try to knock you down, right? And so therefore you're right, it is this hopelessness that happens as a result of that reoccurring over and over again. And for me, this is just us talking on this call, I can't fathom it. For me, it's just hard to understand how, and I'm not saying the people on this call, but how a group of people could hate someone that much. I mean, it's already like, dude, we already behind. We already, it's not like we are ahead or we are trying to be, we're not even, you don't even hear white on Black crime. It's like, dude, even if we messing with each other, we messing with each other in our communities. We're not messing with y'all. Leave us alone. Let us be. And it's like, it's almost like a target coming out. And I just can't, it's funny and we joke a little bit about it, but it's hard for me to fathom how someone can have that much hate. And it's almost like, the only way I can fathom it, and to give you an example of that, it's almost an NFL football player just constantly picking on the third grade football player and just beating him up. Like, dude, why you beating this man up? This man's third grade football player. He don't even play in the same league as you. He don't have the same resources as you, but you just keep going over there beating him on the head. And it's like, why would you do that? Why would you try to just keep your thumb on someone to that extent? And for me, that really is, that I just don't understand that. And we talked about this on our personal call when you talk about how America has demonized Black men to really make us look like monsters overall. But truth be told, and it's important that we really share truth on this call, truth be told, if you look at what, over the last 150 years, what race has been more violent to each other? It ain't us. I mean, just being honest, it ain't our race being violent to white people over the last 150 years. Truth be told, I should be the one walking down the street saying, oh my God, here come a white man, let me run, right? If you look at the history of race, danger, you know, even to this day, my kids, it ain't me saying, oh kids, watch out for the Black man down there. It's like, kids, no, y'all come on in now. Let's go, let's pack up and let's run. And so it's crazy how the media flips this picture of what they make seem like a dominant, monstrous race when it's this small group of people saying, listen, we just trying to make it. We just want to survive, have a good place to live, good schools to live in with our kids. Let us do it. Leave us alone. Let us be, please.
Yeah. I saw Johnny Holmes. I want to transition to some questions right now, but I saw you itching in your chair, bouncing in your chair. You want to touch on that? You good? Okay. What I want to do now, say again.
I said no need. I think Brother Alex covered that.
All right. We'll let that be then. I want to take the last few minutes here to open up to see if there are any questions that people may have. If you do have any questions, there's a chat feature that we have. You can put your questions in the chat room, or if I'm scrolling through, if you want to raise your hand, if you're on screen, I can put you on, unmute you and let you ask your question live.
Eric, as we're waiting for questions, can I throw one last thing out there, man?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's important I think for us to understand here. And this is me talking with a lot of the CEOs that I'm talking to, and they are great people and they're traumatized, right, with what's going on. And I had one guy tell me, he said, man, America is at its knees and it's hurtful to look at how destroyed our country is. And my response was, brother, no, your world destroyed. My world has been like this. So truth be told, for Black America, this is not surprising, right? This is just surprising for white America. White America saw the death of George Floyd, now seeing a lot of these things that are going on. And truth be told, their world has been shaken. But the Black experience in the Black world, it's nothing for us to come on and say, such and such got killed by the police. And you're like, oh man, God dog, what win the services, right? That's just sad to be like that, but you almost, you're unaffected by that because we've seen it for 40 years. This is what we know and experience. And so I think it's important for us to understand that we're not necessarily traumatized by all this going on. This isn't new to us. Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask Jon Ross, can you see the chat room?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me know if you can monitor that. If you see if any questions pop up there, let me know.
Yep.
I'm also monitoring. I have some people that might text me some questions as well. Mm-hmm. Let me know if anything pops up. And if there's anybody that has a question or a comment, just like I said, raise your hand and we'll try to get you in here in the last few minutes of this call.
Can I say something, Alex? I mean, just to piggyback on what you're talking about, Alex. I was having a conversation last night with one of my former students. I used to teach acting, and they were posting a lot of posts about, Blue Lives Matter, and how her father doesn't dress in his police outfit because he's afraid of going outside and being harassed by people because he's a police officer, and that's why we should be supporting Blue Lives Matter. And I had to reach out to this person and just had this honest conversation about what's going on right now and trying to explain what the Black Lives Matter mean, right? And just kind of help people that may be on the call that doesn't understand the term Black Lives Matter. It's not saying that anybody else's life doesn't matter. It's not saying that white lives don't matter. It's not saying that Black lives are the only thing that matters. It's just saying that, a lot of times in the course of history, It seems like everything else is more important than our lives, right? And I'll get back to the police conversation in just 1 second. I was watching a documentary about Michael Vick's life and what he had did when it came to the dog rings, and the things that he was doing with the dog fighting. And it was amazing to see within the documentary how much white America cared about the dogs, but did not care about his life, right? And what was going on, and how, you know, he just got caught up in a way of making money, but there was a lot of other people making money that way, but he just got caught in that situation. Or like even in the situation where, like I told the person yesterday about, I think that it's a shame that the cops feel that way, right? I think it sucks. I value everybody's life. I do think it sucks. But, you know, what I was telling her, says, well, every day for a Black person waking up, this is a fear that we have every single day just by walking outside being Black. That this may be the day I get harassed. This may be the day that my son doesn't come home. This may be the day that my daughter doesn't come home. My wife doesn't come home. Every single day that we wake up, it feels like there's a threat. And even when stuff does happen to us, it seems like nobody really gives it any weight, right? It's almost like it's cast off to the side. Or even like, I would say that when I hear people say that, this is going to take time to happen. And it's like, well, if it really mattered to you, why should this wait, right? Why should justice wait, right? It's like, if it was any other situation, you would take to the streets and protest. Like I was watching Michael Vick's documentary and seeing the amount of protest and the anger within the community about these dogs, and the dogs' lives matter. I think that it's not cool to dog fight. But what I was saying was the amount of passion that went behind supporting the dog lovers community. And it's not, we have to wait for people to want to support us. And it's just helping people understand that it's not saying that nobody else's life matters, that anything else is not important. Black Lives Matter simply means that we just want, when it comes to the issues that are going on in the Black community, for it to matter just as much as every other issue matters.
Well said.
And John, I'll say this just to show you the context there really quickly. Throughout history, Black lives really haven't mattered, right? And so therefore, that's why it's so important to say this and to talk about this, because the challenge is, and the reason I've had a lot of white friends push back on that is because sometimes, and I tell people, we really have to analyze history properly, right? And so because our history as Americans or white America is gruesome at the start, a lot of people don't want to embrace that. And so therefore we try to sugarcoat it and we try to make it not seem as harsh as it was to kind of make ourselves feel good. And as a result of doing that, we don't really call out a lot of the challenges and things that went on. And even up to this point now, we can't believe some people would do stuff like that, such as you think about the two drug pandemics that we had. We had a crack pandemic, like you mentioned earlier, John, and we had a war on drugs as a result of that. If we gonna do a war on drugs and anybody caught with crack, you're gonna get a almost 3 times sentence worse than someone with cocaine. Well, we understand 5 times worse, right, than someone with cocaine. So you look at that. Crack was in the Black community. Cocaine was considered a white drug. Well, that says subconsciously, we ain't say it, but through the law and the pen, we said Black lives don't matter. But if you fast forward that to where now when we had this pandemic of opioids, now, understand, Black people weren't on opioids. This was a white person drug. All of a sudden, we had a pandemic. Let's go after the pharmaceutical companies. It ain't a war on drugs anymore, saying, oh, everybody on opioids, let's go arrest everybody and put them away for opioids or selling opioids. It's like we need to show love and care for these kids who are on opioids. Well, when we had Black kids on crack, we weren't saying that. We were like, lock them up, put them away forever. Let's do that. So when you look at it, we can go incident by incident, that we haven't said it with our voices, but we've said it with our pens and policies, that Black lives don't matter when you do stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Great point, brother.
Yeah. You want to chime in there, Johnny?
I would just be echoing some of the same sentiments. I do have something I want to share with the entire audience before we go. It's a piece of a reading that I'm currently studying, and it speaks to the stand your ground philosophy. So at any point, whenever you deem that necessary. I did see some questions and some statements in the chat, though. I don't know if you want to touch those.
Okay. Barb, I saw your hand go up. I'll let you ask. And then John, if you can check the chat room and just read off a couple of those, but we'll let Barb go first. Go ahead, Barb. Oh, you got to unmute yourself.
Nobody usually asks me to unmute myself. Kind of rare. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for tonight. I'm going to be 64. So the things that you're talking about, I have seen this. I have seen this in my life, and I know it's wrong. And I just am so grateful for the takeaway of like the quiet story, the takeaway of living all your life in one neighborhood where at least when you're home, you're safe, but where you have to leave and go to school, and so you're not safe. And Johnny, I have thought very much about what you said about white on white. Because I mean, I'm sorry, how many white men are killing their families and children, and yet you never hear, that maybe we should be worried about white men who have families or white men who are getting divorces.
Right.
And when I think about history, I was a young woman, a little girl, when I went to the South, and I saw whites only bathrooms and whites only swimming pools. And we were in Atlanta, and it was beyond my grasp in that heat that a child couldn't go to a pool, because even though now I would never say I don't see color, because of course I do, but when I was a little girl, I really didn't. I saw Ernie Banks.
Yeah.
He was just a baseball player. Like he was just an amazing baseball player. So when I saw a little child, I didn't know that they were different until they couldn't go to a pool. Until I saw what Mayor Daley, and forgive me people, for the Catholic Church, who created Cabrini Green.
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna find a place for you to live, but it's gonna be near nothing. And it's gonna have no industry and no transportation and no jobs. But I have been reading Freshwater Road, which is about the Freedom Summer and the voting. And so I just wanna say, I tried to picture myself being a child who had a parent trying to register to vote. And if they got caught trying to register to vote or going to a class, they could be evicted. They would lose their job. They would be shot at. And they were already living in unfortunate circumstances. So that would have been me, and my children would have grown up with that. And these were Vietnam vets, Korean War vets, World War II vets that then couldn't register to vote. So that everything you brought up today, I think will help me listen. I feel like I've listened, but I also think it'll help me to talk. I hope so anyway, but thank you so very much. And I hope we can do this again, because I don't have to think about anything when I leave my house. My children don't have to think about anything when they leave their house, and they never have had to.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Barb.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Thanks, Barb.
Eric, can I say one thing to just what she said, man, which I think is huge, but it may stir up a fire on this call now, to just be honest with you. Barb said something great that I think we need to address really with white America to get clarity. And this goes around the Colin Kaepernick and the flag, and how they think or thought a lot of black people were disrespecting the flag, even with the Drew Brees statement recently with that. And I think his teammate Malcolm Jenkins said something very, very phenomenal when we make it clear that we're not disrespecting the flag, because we had black soldiers who went off and fought for the same flag in the same war, and when they came back, they were disrespected. They were not respected. They were treated as criminals. They were spit on, and they fought for the exact same flag. And so by people protesting against that, it's not saying we're disrespecting the flag. We're saying, listen, we have two different perspectives. Understand that. Your perspective of American the flag, it stands for you, but the perspective from the black community, even when we went and died and bled for the same flag, we were disrespected. So how can we, at that point in time, not say there's some problem with this in white America, because they don't a lot of times want to admit that harsh reality. They want to be blind to that and just assume that it's disrespect to the flag when it's actually not that.
Well said. Well said. We are wrapping or coming up quickly on the 8:30. We got several questions here. I'm going to get to a couple of them here, as many as we can. So here's a couple of questions here. Wow, just some deep ones here. So Sabrina asked, how comfortable are you just speaking this way with white individuals on the call? Is there what's the level of apprehension about having these types of discussions, knowing that?
I can take that first because I won't be long. I promise you, I have absolutely no apprehension. I'm comfortable around my white brothers and sisters. That's how I see them. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's not until they show me something different, show me that I'm unwanted, that I do a Romans 12, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men, right? So I live peaceably with all men as much as lies in me, but I hit my limit when you demonstrate that you're unwilling to do the same.
Good, good. So here's another question. Do you guys see, this from Shannon, do you guys see the murder of George Floyd as a watershed event? Does it seem sort of different to you than some other civil rights events in the 60s? Because of my perception is that there appears to be more outspoken white allies now, which I hope can affect change more quickly.
Can I speak to that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
The difference is, for the first time in our lifetimes, everything that is a distraction is gone. So you have no choice but to look at it, right? So you just think about this. Before, the pandemic hit, I mean, everybody was shopping, watching TV, watching sports. There were so many distractions. And if you want to talk, spiritually, there were so many different gods out there that you can worship, right? And spend time with. Well, I think that in the season, what we're seeing is God has taken away everything so we can take a look at ourselves. And I think that in this season, you have to really, us as believers, we really have to read our word and believe it all, right? So just like we can believe that God is merciful, that we can believe that God is, this great God, he's also a God of justice, right? And so I always talk about this, and I talked about this on Tuesday, is that just like how God did with Cain and Abel, when he told, Cain, your brother's blood still speaks from the ground. Mm-hmm. I think that we're in a season, because God deals with things in 400-year increments, right? That we're in the season right now where last year he gave us an opportunity. Hey, this is your last year to get it right. We didn't do it. Now I'm going to take away all your distractions, all your gods, and now you have no choice but to deal with it. But make no mistakes that this will come to an end, right? This will come to an end. But I think that the difference between then and now is that we were operating out of God's grace and mercies, where now we're walking into judgment now. And you have to be very careful in your response to when God draws a line in the sand.
Wow. Well said. Well said. So we got one last question here, and we're going to end on this. And I think this is a good one to end on, because it kind of ties into what you were saying about the judgment of God. Scott asked, and this is a deep question, when personally receiving hatred, injustice, under racism, what are some specific scriptures or biblical principles that guide your reaction? What relationship is there between racial division and Ephesians 6, spiritual warfare? To what degree is this hatred issue a social issue versus a spiritual issue? That, I mean, we could almost do another call just on that question. Here's what I will say to that. From a theological perspective, for those of you who are Christians, it's important that we don't separate these social issues as subcategories of the gospel of Jesus Christ. They are literally, they go hand in hand. And to prove that, there's several points in scripture I could point to, but one that's very rarely pointed to is after the death of Jesus and his resurrection and ascension, he sent the church to wait on before you go fulfill this great commission, I want you to wait for the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. And when they waited in this upper room for Pentecost, the Holy Spirit came upon them. And the first thing that happened when the Holy Spirit came upon them is they began to speak with tongues of other nations and other cultures. And other people outside of their Jewish community began to hear them praising God and testifying about God in their own language. So the first thing that the act of God did when expanding the church was he broke down cultural divides, and he did it supernaturally. So it was so important to God to build unity and to draw people in across cultural divides that the world has set up, that he committed a supernatural act to make sure that that happened. Because he knew if you had just sent them out to do it on their own, they would have just gone to the people that they were familiar with. They would have operated in their own spiritual paradigms or in their own comfort zones, and out of good intentions. But God says, no, I want to do something different. I want to do something that's bigger than you. So I'm going to make you wait, and I'm going to instill you with power to reach people in a power in a way that you never could have in your own strength. And so I think it's significant that if God himself did that through his church as a first act to establish a church, how much more do we need to carry that on? Because at the end of this picture, in Revelation chapter 7, John the Revelator begins to paint a picture for all of us, showing what it's going to look like in heaven, where there's all people of different languages and cultures standing before the throne of God, worshiping God, fellowshipping with one another. So if that's our end game, and we know our commission is to reconcile all things back to Christ according to his kingdom, and we know what the end picture looks like, we have to start now. Yeah. So as Jon Ross mentioned, God deals things in increments and in 400-year increments. We're in year 401 from the first slave landing on this continent. And so I believe the judgment of God has hit, that's causing this consciousness shift around the globe, that are seeing things that have been here all the time, but now God has removed the veil. He's peeled back the curtain for us to see things differently. So this is an opportunity for us to get it right. But the difference is we're fighting a battle that God has now defeated. So it's just a matter of time for it to fall. So I could go on, but that's how I would kind of address that question. Do you guys want, Johnny, I want to throw it back to you. You said you wanted to end on something, and then I'll let us close out.
All right, brother. Well, you did ask for a couple of books, maybe documentaries.
Yes.
I think a fabulous book that I read by Beryl Satter, for all the listeners. Beryl Satter wrote a book called Family Properties. It talks about the development of the west side of Chicago and many of the economic challenges that Black families faced as they migrated from the South to the North, and how of 200 and something banks that were lending money to families in Chicago, only one would lend money to African Americans. So when you're faced with those challenges, that would be one book that I'd recommend. I've done some study on the continent of Africa and the history of Africa specific. So there are books like How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. I think that's a fabulous piece that kind of gets more into the whole economy behind I think the slave concept. And then lastly, I think this is the book I was going to quote from. I don't even know if we got time. I really don't want to. It's a Supreme Court decision that I wanted to read a short piece of it because it speaks. But the name of this book is called Stand Your Ground, Black Bodies and the Justice of God by Kelly Brown Douglas. And she speaks to the notion of American exceptionalism, what that idea is, what the myth behind that is. And there was a case in 1923, Supreme Court case, United States versus Bhagat Singh Thine. In this case, Thine petitioned for naturalized citizenship on the basis that he was ethnologically white. He argued that he was from a high caste of Indians, which meant he was Aryan and therefore Caucasian, making him white. The courts ruled against him, denying his citizenship. The case actually turned on the fact that Thine could not blend in with other Americans because he did not look white. Not looking white in the eyes of the Supreme Court rendered him unable to assimilate. The majority opinion is worth quoting at length because it reveals the significance of socially constructed whiteness. It reads, I'm gonna just read a portion. What we now hold is that the words free white persons are words of common speech to be interpreted in accordance with the understanding of the common man, synonymous with the word Caucasian only, as the word is popularly understood. As so understood and used, whatever may be the speculations of the ethnologists, it does not include the body of people to whom the appellee belongs. It is a matter of familiar observation and knowledge that the physical group characteristics of the Hindus render them readily distinguishable from the various groups of persons in the country commonly recognized as white. Children of English, French, German, Italian, Scandinavian, and other European parentage quickly merge into the mass of our population and lose the distinctive hallmarks of their European origin. On the other hand, it cannot be doubted that the children born in this country of Hindu parents will retain indefinitely the clear evidence of their ancestry. What we suggest is merely racial difference, and it is of such character and extent that the great body of our people instinctively recognize it and reject the thought of assimilation. So I wanted to share that because a sister who's in seminary, because of a lot of the work that we do on the ground, sent that to me because she wanted to really help me, like you're doing with the COINTELPRO, kind of go back and understand the philosophies and the ideologies that help shape a lot of the opinions that we're still seeing, you know, remnants, the residual effects of. But I totally agree with that last word you said, bro. I think it's already been condemned by the Almighty. And so it's just a matter of time before it all drowns.
Amen. I agree. Well, we're gonna close. Thanks for that passage of that book. We're gonna close now. I'm gonna just pray. We're gonna stick around for a couple of minutes because there's people asking for resources. So I'm gonna ask you guys, for those of you who have shared a book, Barb, you had shared a book. If you guys can put those in the chat so everyone can see what those resources may be. Someone else had put in a couple of resources as well. The Seeing White podcast, which we are actually doing a small group centered around that right now that Jon Ross is kind of helping us lead. So let's put those resources. If you want to share those resources or want to get those resources, you can kind of stick around for a few minutes. We'll leave those in the chat. I'll leave the Zoom call on a little bit longer. But if we can just bow our heads, I'm going to close us out now. Dear God, I just want to thank you for these men of God, who have taken the time just to share and be transparent in this moment, to share their experiences, their thought, to give another perspective on life. And it's important, God, because you've called us to be bridge builders. You've called us to be to love our neighbors as ourselves. You've called us to be an example to other people in the world of what it means to build unity, to build community, and not just with those who are like us, but those who are different than we are, God. You've made all of us in your image and likeness. And so I pray that you would allow us to put down our biases, our hurts and our pain, to be able to see a reflection of you in our neighbor, in our brothers and sisters in Christ, especially those who don't look like us. So grant us to momentum in this journey, to continue to push forward, to learn about each other, to learn about you. And we're believing that you're going to do something incredible in this nation, but more specifically in our hearts. So God, guide us as we continue to walk this journey. In your son's name I pray, amen. Bless you guys. Thank you guys for joining. Thank the panelists. So yeah, if you guys can drop those resources in the chat room, and for those of you that want to pick those up, you can look in the chat and get those resources. Thanks, John, Johnny, Alex. Appreciate you guys, man.
Thank you, my brother, and thanks to all those that came out and just listened, man. I appreciate the audience and their interest in our conversation. Appreciate your feedback as well. Grace and peace.